The splash was loud enough that every gull on the pier screeched awake, and for a second I thought the Lexus had blown a tire before rolling into the bay. But no, it was the sound of 2 tons of SUV meeting saltwater, sinking nose first while the owner screamed my name like I personally dragged her car into the sea. That moment, when Karen realized gravity does not respond to entitlement, was the moment everything finally made sense. But to tell you how we got there, we have to back up 24H. I moved to this tiny lakeside community 3 years ago. I bought a small house with a private dock and ramp. Not fancy, but it came with the greatest luxury any boater could ask for: the freedom to launch whenever I wanted. The neighborhood was peaceful, mostly retirees with fishing boats, except for one person who managed to bring city-level drama everywhere she went. Her name was Sharon, but everyone called her Karen, because the title fit like a tailored blazer. She lived 2 houses down in a house. Karen took an interest in my ramp. The first week I moved in, she marched over wearing big sunglasses at dusk and asked if I could help her launch her kayak sometime. I said sure. That was my first mistake. Sometime became every other morning, then every morning, then evenings too. She'd show up with her kayak and expect me to carry it down to the water because she had a sensitive wrist. One morning she whispered that she'd rather I store her kayak on my dock so she wouldn't have to drag it fro. The second mistake was letting her think politeness meant permission. Fast forward to last week. I came home from work to find her Lexus parked diagonally across my boat ramp, blocking it entirely. She was sitting on a lounge chair, reading a magazine like she owned the place. I asked her to move. She waved me off like a mosquito. "I'll be done in a few minutes," she said. I pointed out that it was my private property. She said she didn't see a sign, therefore it wasn't private. That's not how private property works, but logic is like sunscreen to her. She avoids it and BU. I called the sheriff. Karen leapt up and started yelling about how I was overreacting. The deputy showed up and she immediately turned on the waterworks. "I'm a single mother," she cried, even though her son is 20 and away in college. "He's my only baby, and this man is harassing me." The deputy looked exhausted. He quietly told me this wasn't worth the paperwork and suggested we work it out like neighbors. Karen smiled triumphantly like she just won Olympic gold in manipulation. That night, I ordered a custom sign online. It read, "Private boat ramp. Vehicles will be towed without warning." When I installed it, Karen walked over, coffee cup in hand, and said, "Cute. But nobody is going to tow a Lexus from the water's edge." Then she smirked and strutted back home. She was right. Towing companies refused to take the risk near the shoreline. Great. So I asked around and found a guy named Earl with a tow truck and a voice like gravel. He agreed to tow anyone who blocked my ramp, as long as I signed a waiver. I signed without blinking. 2 days later was the big test. It was Saturday morning, sun, calm wind, conditions to launch my boat. I hooked up the trailer, drove to my ramp, and, surprise, Karen's Lexus sat right in the middle of it, trunk open, yoga mat laid out like she was hosting a lakeside retreat. She waved. "Just doing my stretches. Can't you use the public ramp down the road?" I reminded her, again, that this was my ramp. She accused me of gatekeeping the community shoreline. I accused her of trespassing. She pretended not to hear me. I pulled out my phone and called Earl. She laughed. "You think that rust bucket can tow a Lexus? Good luck." Earl arrived faster than I expected, humming some country tune. He saw the situation, nodded once, backed up, and hooked her Lexus to his truck like it was just another Tuesday. Karen went ballistic. She screamed that she knew the police chief, that her HOA would shut me down, that she was going to sue me for emotional distress. Earl simply tipped his hat and drove off with her car bouncing slightly behind him. Karen's jaw hit the ramp and cracked metaphorically. For the next several hours, Karen lurked around her house like a cat plotting revenge. She didn't speak to me. She didn't look at me. But I could feel her rage through the hedges. Then noon came. I was in my driveway packing gear when I heard the rumble of her Lexus engine. She pulled up, windows down, arms crossed like a warlord assessing terrain. Without a word, she drove straight onto my ramp and parked even farther down the slope than before. And then, she put it in park, grabbed her purse, locked the doors, and walked away. To her house, leaving her SUV hanging half over the water like an appetizer for Poseidon. I stared. She looked back at me once, smiled, and closed her front door. That was her message. Try towing it now. I took a deep breath. I was done fighting over property lines and courtesy and common sense. This was about something bigger. It was about boundaries, and watching them sink when people stomp over them. I got into my truck, backed down the ramp, and nudged my boat trailer as close as I could to her Lexus. I wasn't touching it. I wasn't damaging anything. But the pressure created a gentle push. Before I could even finish lining up, the Lexus rolled an inch. Then another. Then the wheels slipped on the wet concrete. Gravity took over. The Lexus slid with a slow, graceful inevitability, like a swan dive designed by a committee of idiots. Karen came running out when she heard the first splash, screaming like her soul had been dunked in ice water. Now here we are again at that sound, the sound of consequences, the sound of a vehicle learning it is not amphibious. And as she shrieked my name, I just stood there, calm, sarcastic, and for once in control. She accused me of sabotage, negligence, witchcraft, anything she could manage between breaths, while I reminded her that parking brakes exist and that property rights don't disappear just because someone doesn't like being told no. The Lexus kept sinking, bubbles rising, and I realized the real satisfaction wasn't watching the car go under. It was watching the moment she finally understood she couldn't push me anymore. Her voice cracked, neighbors peeked from behind curtains, and the lake swallowed her possession while the sky stayed blue and unbothered. I didn't celebrate or cheer. I let the scene explain itself, a reminder that respect isn't optional and patience runs out for the polite ones. She wanted a battle, and instead she got physics. It felt like justice arriving on schedule. Finally. Karen's screams echoed over the water like someone strangling a peacock. Neighbors clustered on decks and behind railings, all pretending to check the weather while secretly savoring the spectacle. Her Lexus bobbed once like it was reconsidering life choices, then dipped fully underwater. One last trail of bubbles marked where luxury became lake decor. Karen spun toward me, hair whipping like a furious sea witch. "You did this!" I calmly placed my hands in my pockets. "Your parking brake did or didn't. Hard to tell from here." She stomped so close I could smell her cherry hand lotion turning sour under rage. "You're paying for all of it. Every penny. And I'm calling the police right now." She dialed, deliberately loud. I waited, watching seagulls circle like they were scouting a new artificial reef. Her voice wavered, high-pitched and dramatic, as she told the dispatcher that I had deliberately launched her car into the lake using a boat. The dispatcher apparently didn't buy that story because she demanded a pause, then gave a strained, "Okay, ma'am, officers are on the way." Karen hung up and crossed her arms like she'd just declared war on behalf of the state. "Enjoy jail," she hissed. I didn't respond. There was nothing to defend. The evidence literally submerged itself. Minutes later, 2 sheriff patrol cars rolled up, lights flashing. Officers got out, surveyed the lake, and then exchanged the kind of glance cops give each other when the paperwork has already become a nightmare. Karen launched into a monologue before anyone asked. "He pushed it. With his truck. He rammed it into the water. That is attempted murder of property." The female deputy raised a hand. "Ma'am, this is private property, correct?" "Yes, but..." Karen froze, realizing she just confirmed the part she wanted to deny. "And did he ask you not to park here before?" the deputy continued. "He harasses me constantly," Karen said. "I'm a female homeowner." I blinked. I was also a homeowner. And a human. But logic wasn't allowed into this conversation without a pass. The male deputy gestured toward tire marks angled down the wet ramp. Looks like your car rolled on its own. Did you leave it in neutral? Karen opened her mouth, shut it, then dramatically gasped like she'd been punched by the question. I must have been distracted. Because he was threatening me. I was 40 feet away tying down a fishing crate, I said. Threatening the fish, maybe. The deputies exchanged another look. Karen saw her narrative slipping. So she pivoted. Well, he has no sign. Anyone could think this is public. I pointed directly at the brand new sign that practically screamed private boat ramp. Vehicles will be towed without warning. She stared at it like it had just appeared from a portal. That sign is illegal. How so? Asked the deputy. It's mean. The deputy wrote something down. Karen relaxed, thinking it was notes supporting her delusion. I knew better. That was the sound of a report leaning heavily against her side of the scale. The male deputy walked over to me. We're going to need a statement. And some help getting that car out before it leaks anything into the lake. Earl can probably pull it out, I said. Karen recoiled. No. That hick already scratched it once. Look what he did. She pointed to the tow sticker still on her rear bumper. The bumper that was about 6 feet underwater. The deputy sighed. Ma'am, it's submerged. We are way past worrying about scratches. Karen stomped away, calling someone. Sounded like her insurance or possibly Satan's receptionist. While the deputies waited for a marine tow unit, Karen alternated between pacing, glaring at me, and yelling into her phone. She used phrases like financial ruin, full legal retaliation, and public shoreline seizure. At one point, she cried dramatically, but her tears dried fast when the audience didn't applaud. I tried ignoring her. Truly. But she wasn't coming down from her entitlement high anytime soon. An hour later the towboat arrived. It took another hour to drag the Lexus to shore. When it finally emerged, lakeweed clung to the grill like some kind of sad aquatic mustache. Water poured from the doors and tailpipe. A fish flopped out of the back seat. The tow operator didn't even try not to laugh. Karen wailed. She looked at me with pure hatred. Not anger. Hatred. The kind that usually ends up getting printed on HOA meeting note. My lawyer will destroy you, she said, voice shaking with certainty she didn't deserve. I shrugged. Okay. Oh, you think this is funny, she snapped. I'm going to ruin you. You've already tried ruining my ramp access, I said. This just feels like karma joining the conversation. She stormed off and slammed her door hard enough to rattle windows 3 houses down. The deputies followed her up the walkway for the rest of the reports. I stayed outside, staring at the ramp. It looked peaceful again. Except for one lingering problem. Karen was not the type to accept blame. Not even when the evidence took a swim right in front of her. The next morning, my mailbox was open, stuffed with ripped-up flyers and a crumpled pamphlet about illegal shoreline modifications. I found a note taped to my door. You'll regret ever buying this house. Move. Subtle. At noon, the HOA president, a guy named Gordon, knocked on my door. He always looked slightly sunburned and deeply afraid of confrontation. He cleared his throat. We received a complaint. I gestured to the lake. Let me guess. He coughed. She says you're blocking community access. I almost laughed. That ramp is on my deed. Want to see the paperwork? He raised both hands. No, I believe you. But Karen is persistent. That was putting it lightly. Gordon explained that Karen demanded an emergency meeting claiming I endangered the neighborhood with my boat activities. She said she'd gather signatures requiring the HOA to adopt a rule making all waterfront spaces communal. So because she sunk her own car, I said slowly, I'm the problem? Gordon shrank a little. She's very loud. I leaned on the counter. She doesn't get louder than me. Not anymore. That afternoon, I passed by her driveway. Her Lexus sat under a tarp, dripping lake funk onto the cement. Karen stood nearby talking to a man in a suit with an expression that screamed lawyer regretting his life choices. They both stopped talking when they saw me. Karen smiled like a villain in the moment before launching a monologue. You think physics saved you? She sneered. I have influence. I have friends on the HOA board. I have connections everywhere. She didn't. She barely had the goodwill of her own houseplants. But I didn't say anything. I just smiled politely and walked away. Because a calm man scares a bully more than a loud one. Later that night, I sat on my dock watching the moon shimmer on the water. I should have felt triumphant. But all I felt was the tension of a storm building. Karen wasn't finished. She hadn't even started. A splash echoed across the lake. For a second I thought the Lexus had returned for round 2. But then I saw movement, a kayak with no one paddling. Karen's kayak. It drifted slowly away, carried by the current into deeper water, bobbing like a message from the universe. Did I mention I'm a long game kind of guy? Karen believed she won battles through tantrums. She didn't understand that patience is its own weapon. She didn't realize that when someone wages war over something petty, they tend to expose every vulnerability they have. I watched her kayak float into the dark and considered my options. There were rules to follow. Legal lines to stay behind. But there were ways to enforce boundaries so even a person who ignored all logic would finally understand them. The lake was peaceful again. Too peaceful for her liking. And that's when I realized the true enemy wasn't her Lexus. It was her belief that consequences belonged only to other people. That belief was about to drown. There are calm nights when the world whispers warnings, and most people ignore them until it's too late. That night, the lake was a mirror, perfectly still, except for Karen's runaway kayak drifting like a symbol of everything she refused to control. I watched it shrink into darkness, debating whether this was a sign to step back or lean in further. But when you deal with someone who believes the world bends to their tantrums, stepping back is basically an invitation for them to shove you off a cliff. The next morning, I woke to the heavy thud of someone pounding on my front door. Through the glass, I could already see the rigid posture. Karen, holding a folder stuffed with papers like they were sacred commandments. Her hair was pulled into a ponytail that strained her face into a permanent frown of superiority. She didn't wait for me to invite her in. She stormed inside the moment I cracked the door, yelling that this had gone far enough. I stayed quiet and let her bounce off walls of her own ego. She announced that the HOA had scheduled an emergency meeting for that same evening. She had apparently spent all night canvassing the neighborhood with a clipboard, convincing people that I was a menace. According to her, I endangered children by having a boat, threatened community harmony, violated shoreline aesthetics, and worst of all, refused to share. I asked if she had slept. She ignored the question and thrust a sheet of paper into my chest. This is a petition to make the shoreline communal property, she said. Everyone deserves equal access. Not just you. I glanced at the paper. 5 signatures. All from people who hadn't lived here long enough to know she was a tidal wave in capri pants. I handed it back politely. My deed disagrees. Her voice cracked into something shrill. My lawyer says otherwise. I wondered if her lawyer ever regretted answering her first phone call. She promised that by the end of the day, I would no longer harass the community with my selfish waterfront tyranny. Then she spun around and marched off my porch like a dictator exiting a press conference. I closed the door, laughed quietly, and called Earl. He answered with a grunt. She makin' trouble again? She's escalating. He cursed in a way that made sunlight dim. Want me to drop by tonight? Maybe, I said. Let's see how bad it gets. The day crawled toward the HOA meeting like a fuse to a stick of dynamite. I spent the afternoon working on my boat motor, pretending everything was normal, while Karen strutted through the streets like she was campaigning for emperor of the cul-de-sac. Every time she spotted me, she glared, as if her eyelashes were trying to slap me from afar. By 6 o'clock, neighbors gathered at the rec center. The air smelled of knockoff perfume, fresh anger, and Costco cupcakes. Gordon, the HOA president, looked one panic attack away from resigning. He cleared his throat and opened the meeting with a shaky welcome speech that nobody listened to. Karen pounced before he could finish the first sentence. She stood in the center of the room, arms wide, portraying herself as the savior of community fairness. "We must reclaim our shared shoreline," she declared. "This man has monopolized access to the lake. He steals our peace. He bullies us with police and tow trucks. He sinks pristine vehicles into the water on purpose." Gasp. A few confused mutters. One guy whispered, "Is that where her Lexus went?" I raised my hand slightly. Gordon looked relieved and called on me. I kept my voice steady. "It rolled into the lake because she parked on my ramp, after I asked her not to. Multiple times." Karen cut me off. "Lie. He staged the entire thing." Several eyebrows lifted. People might tolerate her theatrics over misplaced mail and recycling bins, but accusing me of underwater sabotage? That was a stretch even for her. I continued. "The ramp is on my property. It came with the house. And I don't stop anyone from enjoying the lake. I just stop people from blocking my ability to use what I legally own." Gordon asked to see the paperwork. I came prepared. I handed him the deed, with maps highlighting the ramp and dock clearly falling within my boundaries. The room fell quiet while he examined it. Karen couldn't handle silence. "Maps lie," she blurted. "Ink doesn't prove anything. And why does he get special rights? What about the rest of us?" I answered simply. "Because I bought them." Gordon finally looked up, face pale but decisive. "Karen, everything he's done is within his rights. The HOA has no authority to change deeded property or restrict lake access to a homeowner." Karen's expression crumbled into something that could have been devastating if she were capable of humility. But she wasn't. She doubled down. "This is harassment," she screamed. "I am the victim of his aggression." A few neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Sympathy was exiting the room faster than her car sank underwater. One elderly woman raised her voice. "You caused the problem, dear. We all saw how you yelled at that deputy." Karen turned red. "So you're all against me now? After everything I've done for this neighborhood?" Which was absolutely nothing. She demanded a vote anyway. Gordon refused. She demanded the sheriff be called again. Someone told her to sit down. That was the detonator. She lunged toward me across the aisle, jabbing her finger like she was trying to stab the air into submission. "You think you've won? You think this is over? You've humiliated me. My car is ruined. My reputation is ruined. And you laugh at me." I didn't laugh. But the guy behind me did. Karen's glare locked onto him next. Then she noticed everyone else struggling not to laugh too. She misread the situation entirely. She thought she still had a chance. She stormed out, slamming the door so violently it bounced open again, letting her defeat trail behind her like toilet paper stuck to a heel. When the meeting ended, neighbors approached me, apologizing for getting dragged into her drama. A few joked about installing guardrails for luxury vehicles. Even Gordon cracked a smile. I walked home under a peaceful dusk sky. For the first time since moving in, I felt like I belonged here. But victory had a terrible aftertaste, because people like Karen didn't retreat. They regrouped. I made it halfway down my driveway before noticing something was wrong. My dock, my beautiful, sturdy dock, was gone. At least, half of it was. Boards lay floating in the water like driftwood, nails sticking up like broken shark teeth. The entire left side had been ripped apart, hacked, or maybe pried loose by someone with a mission and zero carpentry skills. My boat leaned awkwardly, half-supported, teetering like it was preparing to follow the Lexus into the deep. Karen stood on her lawn holding a crowbar. Not hiding. Not running. Smiling. My throat tightened. Not with fear. With calm, growing certainty. She had finally crossed the line she never believed existed. She wanted war? She was about to learn what happens when the quiet one stops tolerating the loud one. There's a point in every conflict where a normal person would step back and consider their life choices. Karen hit that point, ignored it, backed up, floored the gas pedal, and plowed straight through it holding a crowbar like a pirate captain storming a yacht club. I stood frozen for a moment, not because I was scared, but because I genuinely couldn't believe someone with a working brain could think this was a good idea. My dock looked like it had been attacked by a blind beaver with anger issues. Half of it sagged into the lake, planks bobbing like the rejected pieces of a failed IKEA project. As the boat shifted precariously, a sickening crunch of stress wood snapped through the air. Karen smiled wider. "Private property, right?" she taunted. "Then I guess you can privately fix your stupid little dock." I breathed in slowly, counting the seconds. Boats drifting into the lake? Accidents happen. Cars rolling off ramps? Consequences happen. But intentional destruction? This was an entirely new season of the Karen show. I pulled out my phone. She laughed. "Go ahead. Call whoever you want. I'll tell them you attacked me." Again. She waved the crowbar. "There's video cameras everywhere," I said calmly. "You should know that by now." Her smile faltered. Not from fear. Karen didn't fear consequences, but from the possibility of being proven wrong. She jabbed the crowbar toward me like a sword. "You think you're so clever. But I'll win. I always win." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, like she didn't even believe it anymore. She tossed the crowbar aside and stormed back to her house, leaving destruction floating behind her. I stared after her, my phone still in my hand. I didn't call the sheriff. Not immediately. Reporting her was like trying to herd a cat into a bath. Temporary satisfaction, long-term screaming. No. I needed something better. Something she couldn't twist into a pity narrative. And then, like fate sent a messenger wearing flip-flops and a fish-shaped hat, Earl's pickup rumbled into view. He rolled down his window. Heard yelling. "Guessin' she's a skeleton again?" I pointed to my half-eaten dock. Earl whistled low. "Well now, that's criminal mischief if I ever saw it." His casual understatement calmed me more than any breathing exercise ever could. "Think you can help me reinforce the ramp?" I asked. He grinned. "I brought concrete." It wasn't even a metaphor. He literally had bags of concrete in his truck. Earl didn't prepare for trouble. Trouble prepared for Earl. We got to work. Under the golden evening sun, we repaired the damaged section enough to keep my boat stable. We installed a sturdier barrier near the waterline and placed a fresh anchor point. It wasn't perfect, but it sent a message louder than words. I wasn't backing down. Karen watched the whole thing from her window, a silhouette of bitterness framed by drapes she definitely closed angrily afterward. With the dock temporarily saved, I finally called the sheriff's office. The same deputies arrived as before, their size saying everything. They photographed the damage, took my statement, then knocked on Karen's door. She answered with dramatic tears already loaded and ready for launch. "He destroyed his own dock to frame me," she sobbed. "He's obsessed with me." One deputy rubbed his temple like he felt his remaining hair follicles giving up. "Ma'am, multiple witnesses saw you with a crowbar," he said tiredly. She switched gears instantly. "I was just holding it. For self-defense. Against his aggressive aura." I thought the deputy was going to walk into the lake and never return. They cited her. Officially. A real, legally binding consequence. Karen looked like they sentenced her to life in prison without access to premium cable channels. When they handed her the ticket, she crumpled onto her porch, wailing about persecution, property values, and how God personally promised her dominion over the shoreline. The deputies left. Silence settled like mist. I sat on the end of my dock, feet dangling above the dark water. The lake looked peaceful again, but peace was a liar. I could feel tension brewing beneath the surface, coiling like a spring ready to snap. Later that night, a knock sounded at my door. Not a pounding like Karen's entrance earlier, This was slow, careful. I opened it to find an older neighbor named Linda holding a casserole dish. She shifted awkwardly. We all heard what happened. Thought you could use something warm. Warmth wasn't the food, it was the gesture. I thanked her and tried not to look emotionally moved by tuna and melted cheese. Before she left, she leaned in. You know, dear, Karen has always needed to feel powerful. Don't give her that. I nodded. But I already knew that taking power away from someone addicted to it leads to dangerous withdrawals. The casserole helped me sleep, but morning arrived with a fresh storm. My phone lit up with messages from neighbors. Someone had posted to the HOA community page. Hostile dock owner caused property damage and environmental hazard. Petition to remove private ramp writes ASAP. Karen was mobilizing again. Her lies spread fast among those who didn't know what really happened. Rumors grew legs and sprinted through inboxes. One message casually mentioned that I was known to threaten women with tow trucks. Another accused me of polluting the lake with car fluids for attention. Attention. I didn't want attention. I wanted peace. But Karen turned peace into a battleground. Time for me to play the long game again. After lunch, I drove into town and walked into a marine supply store. The clerk looked like he'd been born inside a boatyard. How can I help ya? He asked. I need a security system for a dock. Waterproof cameras. Motion sensors. Something that can live stream directly to the sheriff if someone trespasses. He grinned. You got yourself a dock pirate, huh? Something like that. When I returned, I installed the system meticulously. Karen watched from her porch, clutching a coffee mug like she was drinking pure resentment. I pretended not to notice, because that bothered her more. By evening, I sat on my repaired dock again, freshly wired with tech. Fish splashed near the pilings. Crickets chirped. And then footstep. Karen emerged from the shadows like a raccoon with a law degree. She didn't know about the motion sensors. I saw the red light blink. Recording began. Audio 2. She marched right up to the edge of my dock, staring at me like I was the final boss of her personal video game. You think cameras scare me? She hissed. No, I said. The law does. She scoffed. You're weak. Your little ramp won't survive this. I'll tear it out board by board if I have to. I'll make sure everyone hates you. You ruined my life, and now I'll ruin yours. Her voice was steady, cold, clear. No theatrics. For the first time, I saw the real Karen, not dramatic, not shrill, but quietly dangerous. She stepped closer, eyes narrowing. You haven't seen what I'm capable of. The camera blinked again, brighter. She noticed and took a step back. Then she whispered something that made the air turn sharp. If I can't use that lake, then neither can you. She turned and disappeared into the darkness. The threat hung over the water like a storm cloud. She wasn't done breaking things. She had barely started. There are threats people make that you forget by breakfast, and there are threats that keep you awake listening for footsteps on your dock. Karen's last words were the second kind. If she couldn't control something, she would rather destroy it. That's not pettiness anymore. That's ideology. The new cameras worked beautifully. Their tiny red lights blinked like watchful stars, each one sending a live feed straight to my cloud storage and a local copy to a hardened drive inside my house. Tamper-proof, which meant if Karen tried to vandalize them, she'd be filming her own arrest. But cameras don't stop someone who has already decided consequences are optional. The next morning, I checked the footage expecting to see a raccoon or maybe Karen practicing villain monologues under moonlight. Instead, I found a timestamp around 3:14 a.m. Motion detected. Karen, wearing all black like a ninja sponsored by Target, tiptoed onto my ramp carrying a jerrycan. My heart hammered as I watched her through the feed. She bent down near the wooden posts and started pouring something thick and dark onto the plank. Flammable. She was trying to burn my dock. But then she noticed the sensors and froze. The cameras rotated slightly, tracking her movement. She panicked and bolted before lighting anything. The footage ended with her sprinting back to her yard like a guilty shadow. I exhaled slowly. That was enough. I called the sheriff and they sent the same deputies again. The female deputy stared at the footage and sighed deeply, as if karma had put her on a retainer. "We can arrest her for attempted arson," she said. "This is serious." Karen was handcuffed on her porch while screaming at the top of her lungs that I had staged a deepfake recording. The deputy informed her that local sheriffs don't have the budget to fake criminals into existence. She refused to get into the back of the cruiser until they threatened to add resisting arrest. Her hair frizzed into chaos, her mascara streaked into war paint, and her once pristine voice cracked into curse words that probably made the lake blush. As the car took her away, neighbors watched silently. No one intervened. No one defended her. The tides had shifted. And just like that, the neighborhood had peace. For about 6 hours. At noon, Gordon knocked again. He looked like someone who hadn't slept since 1997. "The HOA received a legal notice," he said weakly, handing me a crisp envelope. Inside was a formal complaint alleging harassment, defamation, property sabotage, emotional trauma, and malicious boating. Karen had filed it before her arrest, probably while harnessing the manic powers of caffeine and vengeance. Gordon rubbed his eyelids. "She's demanding an emergency injunction to stop you from using the ramp until the case is resolved." I blinked. "She's in jail." He shrugged helplessly. "She's efficient." The hearing was set for the next morning. Karen didn't do small battles. She fought in nuclear options and then got surprised by radiation. That evening, Earl stopped by again. He leaned against his tow truck, arms crossed. "Got word she bailed out. Her sister signed for it." I stared at the peaceful lake. "So she's coming back." Earl cracked his knuckles. "Want me to stick around tonight?" Tempting. But I still believed in legal justice more than vigilante justice. At least, mostly. "No," I said. "Not yet." He nodded, but his eyes lingered suspiciously on the shoreline, like he expected the lake to erupt with Karen energy at any moment. Night draped the lake in the kind of quiet that tricksters love. I checked the cameras twice. Then a third time. No movement. Eventually exhaustion smothered anxiety, and I fell into bed like a dropped anchor. Sometime before dawn, a loud mechanical groan ripped through the silence. I shot upright, heart slamming. The noise was unmistakable, chains tightening, metal dragging. I dashed outside barefoot. Karen was back. She stood near the ramp, soaking wet up to her shins, teeth clenched in a grin that imagined triumph. At the far end of the dock, her half-sunken Lexus was now tied to a winch mounted on a rented truck parked illegally across my yard. She was trying to haul her drowned SUV up onto my ramp. Illegally. Damaging my boat. Destroying the repairs Earl and I had made. She saw me and shouted over the whine of the winch, "This is my evidence. I'm retrieving my property from your water." "My water," I repeated. It wasn't even worth correcting. The Lexus rose like an undead sea creature, algae hanging from the bumper, water pouring out in a dirty torrent. As it thudded onto the ramp, her winch snapped, flinging the vehicle sideways. It slammed into my boat trailer so hard the metal shrieked and bent at a grotesque angle. Karen pumped her fists like she'd scored the winning goal in a sport only she played. "See what you did? Criminal damage. Right here." Her logic was underwater with her car. I reached for my phone, but she ran toward me, shoving it out of my hand before I could dial. The phone skidded across the concrete and plopped right into the lake. She gasped as if I had dropped her firstborn. "You'll pay for that too," she shrieked. I stared at the ripples. I wasn't angry. I was done. I stepped forward just once. She stumbled back. The night isn't loud, but silence can slap harder than shouting. "You need help," I said quietly. "I need a new car," she spat. Sirens blared in the distance, faster response than usual. Maybe the deputies had started preemptively circling any time someone said the word ramp. Karen didn't stick around for them. She scrambled into the rented truck, slapped the transmission into reverse, and sped off, ripping one of my pilings free as the winch cable tightened and snapped loose. Wood splintered. Water splashed. My doc groaned in agony. But she didn't get far. The deputies cut her off before she reached the street. She tried to flee on foot. She slipped on the wet grass. She face-planted. Handcuffs snapped closed around wrists that had held crowbars, jerrycans, and way too much entitlement. The deputies looked at me with a mix of sympathy and exhaustion. One of them said, "We're charging her with trespassing, destruction of property, violation of bail terms, and attempted theft of a Lexus she already owns?" He shook his head. "I don't know how to categorize most of this." They asked if I wanted to press additional charges. "Yes," I said. "All of them." Karen screamed from the squad car, "This is all your fault. I will never forgive you." The door shut before she could invent more crimes to accuse me of. The sun rose slowly over the lake, illuminating the wreckage. My ramp was torn up again. My boat trailer was mangled. The dock leaned like it was exhausted from surviving this far. But that sunrise felt like a quiet promise. For the first time, Karen wasn't going back home with a warning and a smug smirk. She was going somewhere with bars. And no shoreline. Every story has a climax, but sometimes the climax is less a bang and more a deep breath that finally empties your lungs after weeks of holding it. When the deputies drove Karen away for the second time, the lake finally sounded like itself again. No shouting. No winches. No entitled battle cries. Just water swaying against rocks, whispering relief. But quiet can be fragile. And the aftermath of a storm is where you measure what truly survived. The sheriff's office assured me that Karen would face a judge the next morning for violating her bail. I spent the day repairing what I could. Earl returned with fresh lumber, concrete mix, and a toolbox that looked like it could fix a broken universe. We worked together in a steady rhythm, no small talk needed. A job like this said more than words ever could. By evening, the dock looked alive again. Stronger than before. Reinforced with metal brackets and thick bolts that even Karen's crowbar wouldn't dare challenge. When we stepped back to admire the work, Earl nodded with quiet pride. "She ain't talking this one down," he said. Then he glanced toward Karen's dark cottage. Empty driveway. Quiet windows. "Though I reckon she'll try." I asked him why he thought that. Earl spat into the gravel. "Crazy don't quit." Peace fell with the night. I grilled dinner, sat on my porch, and stared at the water. For the first time in weeks, my shoulders weren't knotted into stone. The moon reflected calmly, and I almost believed the chaos had ended. Almost. Just before midnight, headlights appeared at the end of the street. A sleek black sedan rolled to a stop near Karen's house. Two people stepped out. One I recognized from before. The lawyer who always looked one signature away from quitting law entirely. The other was a tall man in a blazer too expensive for this neighborhood. They walked to my yard, stopping before the ramp. The tall man introduced himself politely. He was Karen's insurance representative. The lawyer nodded, exhaustion dripping from him like sweat. "We're here to assess the damage," he said. "To both properties." I gestured to the remains of the boat trailer, the cracked section of the ramp, and the tire marks etched into soil that had never asked for any of this. They inspected every inch, the insurer taking photos with a professional lack of emotion. Then came the statement I never expected to hear. "The insurance company will fully cover repairs to your property," he said, "and compensate you for any future dock reinforcement or trailer replacement." I blinked. "Really?" He glanced at the lake as if expecting a Lexus ghost to surface. "We have concluded this situation is the result of our client's negligence and repeated criminal behavior." The lawyer muttered something about end of his rope. The representative continued. "We'd also like to offer a settlement. Confidential. Substantial. In exchange for agreeing not to pursue additional civil action beyond the charges already filed." For a moment, waves of satisfaction rolled through me. Karen had finally slammed into the immovable wall of reality. She wanted control, power, and dominance, and instead she'd bought me a new dock. I signed the agreement. They handed me a check that made my jaw drop. Then they unlocked Karen's house and started boxing up everything inside. She will not be returning here, the insurer said. We are moving her to a different property owned by the family. Far from water. The lawyer whispered a tiny, desperate thank you before they left. When morning came, the neighborhood buzzed quietly with rumor. Neighbors approached me with cautious smiles, relieved the turmoil might actually end. Even Gordon found his backbone long enough to say, "Good job," before retreating to his HOA paperwork bunker. I walked down to the dock, coffee in hand, marveling at how peaceful the lake looked again. It was finally over. Then I heard the banging. Karen. Screaming inside her former home. Apparently she'd been released early, driven by blind fury instead of a ride. She clawed at the locked door like a wild animal, demanding her keys. Then she saw me. Her voice tore through the calm. "You ruined me!" She stumbled toward the dock. No car. No lawyer. No audience. Just rage, pure and raw. Her once flawless hair was tangled, her expensive clothes wrinkled, her eyes glassy with sleepless revenge. "You think you've won?" she snarled. "You think you get to keep this lake? This ramp? This life?" I stood on the dock and watched her unravel. "Karen, go home. Wherever that is now." She stepped onto the dock, fists clenched. "I will never let you be happy here. Never." Then she took another step. The one she shouldn't have. The dock was sturdy. But she wasn't steady. Her soaked sneakers slipped. Gravity grabbed her like an old friend. She fell forward with a splash so loud, the gulls squawked in protest. For a moment I thought she'd come up screaming again. But she flailed silently, gasping as the cold water swallowed her arrogance whole. I grabbed a life ring, tossed it to her, and reached down. "Grab it!" I yelled. Because here's the thing about people who cause chaos. They still don't deserve to drown. She clung to the ring with trembling hands. I hauled her up onto the ramp, water pouring from her clothes like melted spite. She lay there, coughing, defeated and terrified. The screaming was gone. The fire was gone. All that remained was a person who had finally met the bottom. Literally. Paramedics arrived, called by a neighbor. They checked her out and wrapped her in a blanket. She didn't resist. Didn't argue. Didn't speak. She just stared at the lake like it had betrayed her personally. When they took her away, I stayed on the dock. The lake sparkled under the morning sun, unaware of the battles fought on its edge. Weeks passed. Repairs finished. Insurance covered everything. The new dock looked like a fortress. The HOA quietly removed Karen's name from every mailing list. Word spread that she was living with a relative several states away, under close supervision. No more Lexus. No more crowbars. No more midnight sabotage. Just silence. And then, something unexpected. A month later, I received a letter. Handwritten. From Karen. It wasn't an apology. Not exactly. But it wasn't an attack either. She wrote that she had started therapy. That she was learning to let go of things she couldn't control. That maybe she needed to disappear for longer this time. At the bottom, a single line. "I hope the lake treats you better than it treated me." I folded the letter and tucked it away. Sometimes victory looks like someone finally facing themselves. That evening, I launched my boat into clear water, unblocked by anyone. The sun set gently while ripples spread across the calm surface. Freedom never felt so quiet. So deserved. As I drove across the water, I couldn't help but glance back once. Where the Lexus sank months ago, bubbles still occasionally rose, like the lake quietly laughing with me. Consequences float. Even when cars don't. Lake calm tonight finally.